Well, hello and welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed that last conversation as much as our team did here at the CAC. For those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Michael Poffenberger. I'm the Executive Director here at the Center for Action and Contemplation. And our conversation today is really about how we're starting to think about the future of the Living School, some of the questions that we're asking as a team in support of the faculty, and how the school itself can be part of what we've started to refer to as our emerging Christian Contemplative Movement. So we look forward to a conversation with you all in some time later in the session to be in dialogue about some of these questions with the very community that we feel is invested with us in this project. Richard first set about with our team here at the CAC to found the Living School way back in 2012. He invited Jim and Cynthia to join him as the founding faculty for this new project called the Living School. Their vision was to found a school of Christian contemplative formation that still to this day is really one of a kind in offering such a deep, immersive experience in Christian mystical wisdom and practice specifically for lay people. They also had a sense that their effort was part of an important historical moment, and that maybe history is asking something of us in this time. They saw that contemplative traditions offer some of the keys to a way forward for our planet, a consciousness grounded in the reality of our interconnection with all life, and can offer spiritual tools that equip people with what we need to become agents of prophetic love and hope for a world in trouble. And you heard each of our faculty members speak to that in this last session and what's on their hearts as they continue that mission moving forward. So today, nearly 10 years later, I want to take an opportunity to reflect on that same founding vision of the school, take stock of some of what we're learning as a community, and share a few questions on our hearts. As I'm sure you've heard, we've paused enrollment for a year in the school to really discern what the future might look like for the school. And we want to invite you to join us in that reflection, in that conversation, in considering what might the future hold for us individually and collectively as a community. So first, let's talk about the historical moment. I know I don't need to convince you, but our planet and civilization are in crisis. Never have the dead ends of our current way of being been more evident. We face an epidemic of mental health challenges. Suicide, depression, anxiety, and loneliness, especially for our young people, rooted in the deterioration of the structures and cultures that support our communities. We face increasing economic inequity. This is the first generation of working class Americans that's likely to be poorer than their parents were. We're more and more seeing the irreversible effects of human greed on our planet and how climate change will shape and disrupt life for generations to come. Amidst all of this, the very social, religious, and political institutions meant to bring us together and find solutions, including our churches, have been unable to overcome a deepening sense of polarization. These challenges really are revealing what many of us have already long known, or at least felt in our hearts, that our dominant culture and way of life is not creating the conditions for healthy communities and people, or for sustainable relationships with the more than human world that we inhabit. Many people have written off our religious traditions really as being part of the problem. Certainly much of the history of our Western Christian tradition and the ways the Gospels have been used to justify oppression and exploitation validate that cynicism. However, we at the CAC and here in the Living School also believe that we have an opportunity to be part of a groundswell of contemplative renewal. And in fact, that's one of the keys to what humanity needs in this moment. I want to refer back to a beloved CAC partner and past teacher that you may have heard of, Joanna Macy. She points to this in her book, Act of Hope, where she describes 3 stories emerging in this fraught moment for humanity. The first is what Joanna calls business as usual. It's the dominant narrative, a willful belief that we don't need to change, a form of conscious or unconscious denial of the interconnected crises we face as a species and as a planet. This narrative of business as usual is constantly drawing us to justify looking out only for ourselves, to think that endless economic growth and exploitation is not only possible, but actually virtuous, to convince us that our core nature as individuals is just to look out for our own good without responsibility to each other or our common natural home. The second story Joanna talks about is what she calls the great unraveling. And in my experience, at least, it's often the temptation of the kinds of sophisticated people that are often drawn to the CAC, and maybe even just looking for a way out. The great unraveling narrative looks to the future and sees only reasons for hopelessness and despair. It paralyzes us from taking meaningful action and convinces us of the lie that our choices don't matter. The third and final story that Joanna talks about is the great turning. For those who know the first story of business as usual is leading us individually and collectively to catastrophe, but also refuse from the depths of our hearts to let the great unraveling have the last word. Who know from the reality of our own inner experience that God's love is always present and accessible through cycles of life, death, and resurrection. And that our hope as Christians is not in avoiding the realities of death and discomfort, but instead in choosing to live meaningfully as witnesses to the mystery of love with whatever we are given. Choosing the great turning as the narrative for our lives and communities and the backdrop of our discernment around the living school requires more than just reading the book and resonating with these ideas. As you all know, because you've been through the living school, it requires experiential knowing and connection with God's big story in each of our lives and contexts. It requires contemplative knowing that allows us to look out at reality in all its beauty and tragedy with the eyes of love, like Jesus looking out from the cross. That's the opportunity we see here for the Living School and what we believe history is asking of us to be a part of. The Christian narrative remains a dominant force in our society, all too often, most often even, in ways that support business as usual. In my experience, most and maybe even all of you came to the Living School because something in your lives led you to see that that narrative isn't working and to hunger to be a part of a renewal, to provide hope for our times, to learn from teachers who are trying to communicate a different way of understanding our tradition and being in the world, and a community who are trying to live into it, like each of you are. I know that's true for me. I can still remember back in 2014 when I came to the very first symposium that I attended for the Living School and walked into one of Cynthia's talks and just experienced this heart opening of, oh, I didn't know it could be that way. I didn't know that this opportunity that Father Richard started here at the CAC and our faculty started through the Living School, that we could all be part of something devoted to the biggest possible story for our lives and for our world. Through the Living School, I hope you've had your own yearnings for that validated and gained some of the tools I think we all need for this next stage in our personal and planetary journeys. So now what? Our team paused enrollment in the Living School to reflect and ask ourselves what we've learned in nearly a decade in trying to serve that intention, being a part of this contemplative renewal of our own Christian tradition, and how the school can evolve in a way that deepens our capacity to be of service in these times. Certainly, I think we can all expect there's lots of practical changes to make as we assess the experience of the faculty, the curriculum, and the students, as we prepare even for Richard to hand off his role as the founding dean of the school. But for today, I want to pose 3 of the deeper questions that we're also asking. Questions we see as important for not only our school, but for our broader Christian contemplative movement, and invite to hear some of your reflections on those questions and what other questions are coming up for you. So the first, how can we help our community apply contemplative wisdom, not just as individuals, but as part of building communities and strengthening our emerging contemplative movement. For some of us, we are deeply implanted in spiritual communities. We found meaningful support and outlets for living our vocations as contemplatives in the world. Maybe that's true for you, and if so, I'm sincerely happy for it. For others, and especially those perhaps in younger generations, there's more of an allergy towards traditional faith communities, especially any who espouse a worldview at odds with the message we teach here at CAC. But in being spiritual pioneers and leaving behind, as many of us have, inherited faith communities, there's also a danger that we end up making it about perhaps just our own individual lives and journeys, or even just our community here within the Living School. I wonder if this is a temptation, particularly for those of us from dominant cultural contexts, where contemplation has sometimes been taught and even distorted in a way that reinforces a culture of individualism. But as we all know, this path is meant to be lived in and through service in community. The invitation of our teachers and of this tradition is for when we sit on our mats to take up our mantle as agents of love, to participate in the service and healing of our world and ourselves all at once. So for this next chapter, what might it mean for the school to be a leaven in the dough, a resource for the communities that each of us come from and return to, and a catalyst for our broader contemplative movement in this next generation? Second, how can we better equip students to apply their experience on the contemplative path within their own vocational lives and experiences? As you heard from our teachers, and I know you all know already and learned in the school, no single effort or program is it. It's not the linchpin to realizing our vision for a more just and connected world. Father Richard taught this in the intensives, perhaps you remember, with the metaphor of the swollen river causing people to drown. So our work here at CAC is about helping people learn to not fall in the river, giving them alternative visions for a healthier system, basically teaching up and raising up a different consciousness that our world needs now. But we rely on others to help us hold other parts of what this requires, to pull people out of the water who are at risk of drowning, to go upstream and fix the dam, doing the hard work of changing systems, to create alternatives for how to manage water systems in a safe and sustainable way. Each of us have a part to play, and as I know already, we're all playing some part in that. Whether working on the edges of dominant spaces, churches, theologies, corporations, governments, holding posts as an example of something different. Or we're actively trying to create new models for a more loving and interconnected planetary future in our homes, in our communities, in our churches, in our world. During Conspire, one of the things we're excited about this year is that we're featuring not just teaching, but sharing stories of how some members of our community are applying contemplative wisdom in their own lives and contexts. And we're going to be featuring some of the partner organizations that we see as being vital part of holding this bigger vision with us and with our Living School community. So just to name a few of those, in case you haven't had a chance to see or connect with them yet. That includes Spiritual Directors International. We have spiritual directors who are going to be on site throughout the conference, offering one-on-one spiritual direction sessions as people are wrestling through some of the big questions that come up in these experiences, and helping hold processing sessions for participants, including our BIPOC and LGBTQIA participants at Conspire. We have Alumni, who's here building off Richard's work to support men on a journey of transformation with other men, providing what I believe and have experienced as role models of healing our culture's toxic relationship to masculinity. We have the Poor People's Campaign, mobilizing us, putting us out in the streets to advance the political change we need to make the beloved community closer to our reality here in our country and in our world. We have Wisdom and Money, who are pioneering how contemplative practice and spirituality can transform our relationship with money. It's the theme in this week's daily meditations, and something Father Richard has become increasingly convinced is one of the keys for us as a civilization moving forward. We have contemplative outreach. We all got to learn centering prayer or practice centering prayer through the Living School, so I know you all know contemplative outreach, founded by Father Thomas Keating. done more, in my experience, than any other organization to introduce Christian contemplative practices and communities around the world. And then we have the community of the Incarnation. It's not one of the formal partners, but one of the founders, Adam Buchko, is here to talk about his experience helping build a model, an alternative model of neo-monastic community, one of what I hope will be many experiences and experiments of lay contemplative community that I believe that we need in these times. So as Living School attendees and sendees, I hope that you'll have time and space to engage with some of these or other partners who are present in the conference, and also to share your own stories on the platform for each other to see, but also for our broader Conspire community to see some of how you're experiencing your experience, how you're applying your experience in the Living School and on your contemplative path and in your vocational lives. But much more to do on that front. The third and final question I want to name that's been on our hearts and minds is how to honor and celebrate the ways that contemplative wisdom arises in different cultural contexts, and especially how to relate to it better across differences of social and cultural power. We heard our faculty reflect on that question, and Brian especially just in this last session, about how our founder's lineage is drawn primarily from European, which is to say white, and patriarchal systems and contexts. And even as we cherish the wisdom lineage that Father Richard has introduced through here at CAC, and the saints and mystics that have informed him and all of our faculty and students, we have to also acknowledge and confront and join in the work of healing the shadow of how our lineage has intersected with constructs of whiteness and other systems of domination in our society and in our world, as part of realizing the potential of our school and our mission as an organization. I'm convinced that the contemplative traditions have so much to offer that task, grounded in our oneness as humans, while still confronting the reality of injustice and the ways that it impacts each of us, internally and externally. As Father Richard has said, unity, in fact, is the reconciliation of differences. And those differences must first be maintained and then overcome by the power of love. You must actually distinguish things and separate them before you can spiritually unite them, usually at cost to yourself. So how we learn to do that is a big challenge and a task for us as an institution, and I know also for so many of us in our community. It's not easy work. But the healing of systems of oppression is a core part of Father Richard's vision in founding the Center for Action and Contemplation and, of course, the Living School. So as we look ahead, those are some of the three questions that we're asking ourselves in this time. And we're also trying to do that at a unique turning point for us as an organization. We've learned so much from Father Richard in his founding of the school and his founding of the CAC and his desire to be an instrument of contemplative renewal and a new consciousness in our world that he's shared through our mission and team here at the CAC. In founding the Living School, he gave us a model to carry forward this work into the future in partnership with other teachers and a whole community of practice. My hope for CAC, while we have Father Richard with us and beyond him, is to be faithful to what his vision was in establishing CAC to be faithful to be a gateway and a midwife for contemplative consciousness, in service to building up our contemplative movement and supporting a great turning for our planet and species. I know we don't hold that vision alone or have all the answers for what it's going to take. We hold it with each of you, and we're learning together how best to serve it. So, with that, I want to pause, take some time for journaling, invite my colleague Kirsten Oates up here with me, and pose a few prompts for your reflection, and then have some time for conversation. So let me post those questions in the chat. The prompts are going to be, first, what points of resonance do you find with this vision for a contemplative movement in service to the Great Turning? Second, what points of resistance or creative friction are you experiencing? And third, what further questions are arising in your heart to raise or follow for us as a community? So we're going to just take 20 minutes, sit with some of those questions, and then have a chance to be in conversation together. I'll see you in 20 minutes. Dive into some of the conversation, we can just take a moment, plant our feet on the ground, take a big deep breath together. Gratitude for this opportunity to be all together for the very first time as a community. And then dive in. So Kirsten and I will participate in the conversation, and I'm going to read out some of the questions and some of the comments so folks can hear more from each other as well. So the first one here is from Martha Kirkpatrick. Sorry for butchering your name, Martha. Please, Living School, don't write off the institutional church. Help us who are in it. In Cynthia's words, it needs repotting. And there are bishops against gun violence, a transformative program for racial justice, sacred ground, and holy, faithful, transformative work going on every day in churches. I don't know what I can add to that besides amen. I don't think we would ever write off the institutional church. In a lot of ways, we rely on the structures of the church to provide entry points. Richard has talked about this idea of the prophetic position being the edge of the inside. Jesus' relationship to his own Jewish tradition, Richard's relationship to the institutional Catholic Church, Cynthia's to her Episcopal tradition, and so forth. So for us, it's always about inviting people who have that hunger for something deeper to go deeper and to provide models for how to do that. So Martha, thank you for your comment and for sharing that with the community. Anything you wanted to add?
We need communities on the ground. I mean, the CACs, we're in one place, one location, and we spread the teaching in these more global ways. So, but we need people on the ground in local communities doing this kind of work. So yeah, that's really important.
Thank you. Tom Morse Brown. Given that technology has been one of our big savers in the last 18 months, that the younger generations have perhaps struggled the most, and that traditional communities are breaking down in many ways, what is the Living School doing in this area to help build and strengthen the contemplative movement? Well, in some ways, I think that's a question for this whole community. This community is the Living School, more so than just those of us who are on staff or here at the CAC or on the team of the Living School. So I think that's a good question for you to be asking each other. Back to that river metaphor, and our job trying to raise up people with a new consciousness that can help be part of the kind of change that I think Tom is talking about. All I want to say, though, maybe to offer one thing, I think there does, into the previous question as well, I do think that there needs to be new models, new structures. Speaking as I'm what's called an elder millennial, an exennial, not quite young person anymore, but certainly somebody who sympathizes with some of the allergy to the traditional communities, as I know many of you do. What's amazing if you read some of the Pew Research about attitudes towards religion is that people's disaffiliation from religion is not at all the same thing as people's disaffiliation from the spiritual journey or from their hunger for deeper, more meaningful forms of community. And so I do think that the institutional churches always are going to have a role, and there's a huge lane for new models and experiments to be started that can speak more to the experience that folks have, that can perhaps navigate around some of the baggage of the more parochial institutions as well. And that's something that we in CAC are holding an active vision for, seeking out models of, sometimes providing funding for in local types of efforts to just experiment with what are the kinds of structures and communities of practice that can bring life to the contemplative message and make it accessible more widely for the next generation. That's certainly part of the vision that we're holding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said.
So Jim Deucer, recognizing that the Catholic Church is really a big player and in spite of the divisions within it that are as dramatic as can be imagined, are there some bishops that might be enticed to partner with the CAC in spreading these messages, they still carry a bit of weight. Yes, yes, and I guess. So when Richard, Jim, and Cynthia founded the Living School, as an example, there was a very purposeful decision made, for instance, not to seek to partner with an academic institution or to get into the business of credentialing. And I think in some ways that shows that there was an intuition overall that to protect the kind of prophetic gift, to avoid the burden of trying to navigate through some of the theological or cultural battles that we see in many of our institutions, that for CAC, that, you know, that edge of the inside, to not try to be in the business of building those institutions or navigating institutional structures and authorities. But what we do see is, in many cases, we have seminaries who have come to have discussions with us about how to develop contemplative formation, to really understand that the academic mode and simply giving people ideas about history is not the same thing as spiritual formation. We've had certainly bishops and leaders from within traditional structures come and be in dialogue with us. And so in those opportunities for being part of creative energy and initiative in those contexts, absolutely, that's something that we see as part of our work here. And I think especially through you all, some of you in this community are holding positions of religious leadership. There is no either or here. And so it's just a question of where do you find the space for that to advance out in the world, for that to be offered. You know, Richard talks about the parachurch spaces historically, where that's the book study groups, the prayer groups, the centering prayer groups, all these things that have happened in those spaces on the margins sometimes of our institutional faith lives. So the yes and is absolutely, that's part of what it's going to take, working within those institutions, even as we try to build new models that aren't constrained by them.
Yeah, and I think as part of this time of looking to the future of the Living School and looking to the future of the CAC, partnerships has become much more of a role we want to play. And so with seminaries that have been approaching us, we are considering, are there ways to offer synergistic support, and that is touching on that younger generation too. So that's definitely something we're investigating, and there's a lot of excitement from seminaries about what we're doing, which has been wonderful for us to hear.
Very encouraging.
Yeah.
Sean Pennington, can you provide a more detailed image or explanation of what a lay contemplative community looks like and how one would begin to build such a community? Wow, that's a big question. Do you want to take a first stab?
Well, I was going to say this is kind of where we're trying to be clear about where we start and end as an organization. You know, what's our role? And, you know, we equip at this more at-scale level from a centralized location. And so these more local communal things that are needed, we're not really the experts in that. We don't build local communities, and so this is where we need to harvest. I'm hoping people will put their stories up on the Conspire wall and help us understand how this work's been translated into local communities and ways of building contemplative community beyond the way we do it at this kind of bigger scale level with a set period of time. So, yeah. Yeah,
amen. I think again, we hold this vision for this broader contemplative movement. You know, when we started the conversations with Father Richard about the future of the CAC, and we recognized that, you know, for him, his purpose in founding CAC was always to be in service to something bigger out there, in service to you all, in service to communities who are applying contemplative wisdom in healing the needs of the world and supporting the needs of the world. And to Kirsten's point, building those communities is not our expertise. We see it happening in a number of different ways that I think fill different kinds of needs. We see it happening, I mean, in pop-up ways, whether it's in our conferences or partner organizations or little groups that form on the edges of their church or in any context to go deep into a study or a practice of something and help each other apply it in the context of each other's lives. But I also want to hold out. I think, you know, in the previous comments, opening comments about this idea that we're in the midst of this great turning, and that contemplative renewal and a new consciousness is being born. Throughout history, that's been the case in times of crisis. And I also believe that there will be new models of what we call kind of the all-in forms of contemplative community, that the model of the religious orders, you know, starting with the Desert Fathers and Mothers who went off and formed their communities in this kind of ad hoc way in the 4th century, through the religious orders who called to people, who spoke, who invited people, who felt in their hearts this desire for dedicating the whole of their lives into this path and into this service. That's where a lot of the jewels of our tradition have been nurtured and maintained on the edge of the institutional church. And I think for this next generation, many of those orders, you know, you hear Richard teaching about how even the Benedictines sometimes don't know their own contemplative roots. They don't have access to some of that tradition. But there needs to be new models for people to go all in, to be part of structures and communities that live the depths of this vocation in the world. So one of them that's here, the Community of the Incarnation that Adam Bucko is starting out of the Episcopal Church. So talk about working with the institutional church. It's starting out of the Diocese of Long Island is one example of that. We've seen that with the neo-monastic movement, for those who know Shane Claiborne and others who've been part of kind of neighborhood type models of doing that. So I don't think there's any one, my basic point is to say I don't think there's any one model for how to do contemplative community. It's really about meeting people where they're at on the path and providing structures that can hold them at different levels of commitment and capacity and hunger for this kind of life.
Yeah, Adam's offering tomorrow, I think. So yeah, if people have interest in hearing about what he's doing, I think it's a great example of trying to establish a deeply contemplative community. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Molly Jackman, can you elaborate on point 3 in the vision? How is Living School grappling with the racism and white supremacy that we have all been socialized in, that costs some people much more pain than others, and that is present within CAC?
Do you want me to start? Yeah.
Go ahead and take a start.
Yeah, one of the gifts of Gigi's new role as manager of the Living School, and one of the reasons we created that role was to help support the Living School in these areas and beyond. But so she's been in a process of forming student groups, student listening groups, that will be bringing in expertise from the community back into the school to help us wrestle with some of these questions. And so that's getting started. I think Gigi's just, she had a number of applications, she's done interviews, and I think she's come up with some wonderful people to support us going forward with that. These are questions we're asking all the time, including Barbara Holmes in our faculty was a big step and a big gift to us as a school to expand our cultural context. And she's been generously highlighting ways that we can be more inclusive. So even when she first joined us, the way we talked about the contemplative tradition, she suggested we add an S to that. That sounded like there was only one tradition. It was the one we were teaching, and
the Western contemplative tradition.
Yeah, which is kind of not what we were trying to, but that was clear when she said it. So we've added to everything we say now, lineages or traditions. So it's definitely on our agenda. We have these student listening groups. We're working with Barbara as we come, journey through this pause and looking at the school. One of the things we'll be talking about is adding teachers, both at the core level, but potentially a range of guest teachers, so that we can have more flexibility and dynamism in who teaches and what they teach. So there are a few ways.
Yeah, and I would just add too, a couple thoughts. Barbara's, Dr. Holmes, Dr. B's work on race in the cosmos was such a gift for us, for our team, for our faculty. I think in giving us a framework to start thinking about both validating the reality of these social issues and the ways that they play out in the world, and invalidating them at the same time as not having the final word on our identities as human beings. And I think that's the unique gift that we have in the contemplative tradition to offer, is holding the both and of that and walking that line delicately in the ways that it shows up in our own contexts and lives. In some of the trainings and work that we've gone through here as an institution, they talk about, the 4 levels of racism or other forms of oppression as internalized, interpersonal, institutional, and systemic. And I don't think there's any one dimension that has the solution to these kinds of systems, right? The unique opportunity I think that we have with the school, because it's a school of formation, is to work with students and our community at the level of internalized. What are the unconscious ways that our social locations, identities, histories, and stories about ourselves and our ancestors, how does that shape how we show up in the world? How can we become more aware of that? How does that shape our notions of God and even our understanding of our Christian tradition? But then how can we as an institution and a community be accountable at the levels of institutional and systemic, to be equipping people as agents of change, to be cognizant of the disparate ways that our programming or teachings are having impacts on people, about the disparate experiences that exist among students in the living school. There are students who share just having painful experience as, for whatever reason, not feeling that they fit into the dominant experience of the living school. So we need to be much more skillful in learning how to support that. And role modeling that, I think, is a part of what this community is. We're trying to figure out how to be an alternative ourselves, and an example of a way of being a contemplative community that is always working. There is no end destination here, but is always working on being part of the healing and the transformation, and a model for how this work might be done elsewhere as well. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I will just add that we are integrating this work much more fully into the curriculum. So we are, with the latest cohort, we've had at the symposia exploring whiteness groups meeting throughout the week alongside the BIPOC groups and the LGBTQIA+ groups. And then we're continuing on with those groups beyond the symposia. So we are trying to integrate, because this is spiritual work. This is our spiritual work, the spiritual work of our day. And so in the past, I guess, as we were kind of trying to bring it more fully into the school, it felt a little separate from what was being taught by the teachers. And so the teachers are much more involved, and we're trying to create this much more integrated way of addressing the issues. Yeah.
From the wisdom of our tradition.
Yeah, exactly.
Traditions, I should say. From Tim Sanger, has the CAC ever explored the possibility of ongoing education for Living School alum? I trust many like myself would be interested in another 2-year program that continues on from the Living School. It would be a helpful source of support and encouragement for those doing the important work in our communities. Kirsten? Or do you want... you tell me.
You can
Well,
start, yeah.
of course, yes, we have explored it.
Yeah.
You heard Richard say part of what gratifies him is when folks no longer need us. Now, I know there's a paradox in there, because we always need to be seeking wisdom, practice, and community in our paths. We feel we are just one institution. Our best gift, Richard's charism that we are working to institutionalize here at CAC, is really being a gateway. Sometimes we talk about ourselves as a front door to this contemplative renewal. And because we're, I think, still in the early stages of this, there's so much hunger and so many needs that to be met. And as at this time, as yet, still few institutions and organized efforts to try to meet them. So we've just been trying to be careful in how we navigate that balance and stay true to what we know we can do and do well, and then release to the Spirit, and with an eye to the broader horizon and the and the cosmic time of how to be supportive towards efforts that are holding other posts. So something like continuing education for our alumni in our current thinking fits into that latter category of wanting to make the room and create the conditions in which other initiatives and efforts can arise to meet needs that are out of scope for our programs here at CAC. And at this stage, that's still one of them.
Yeah. I know in this pause, as we look at the school curriculum, it's funny the way this is coming about right as the pauses began, and so we're living these questions. Actually, the theme the faculty came up with for this symposia for the sending class that's coming in October is living the questions, and how to Barbara said something like, but we still need to take action while we're living the questions. And so this feels like one of those conversations. But you know, as we expand faculty and contexts and things into the school, it is starting to burst at the seams a little bit, the curriculum. And so we've been wondering around things like, do we have electives? Do we have a third year? So we're certainly asking those kind of questions, because there is so much wisdom that we have to offer. So yeah, watch this space, I guess.
Yeah, and you're our people. I don't mean to say we're not in relationship with the Living School community. So whatever we're doing it in relationship with you all, and we hope it's of service to you all. Could the Living School create an online space where we can come to check in with others, say something like the 15 theme areas that you have posted, on the online platform for the conference, I assume. This is from Diane Elson Miller. One of the burdens of being a mystic is that it is incredibly isolating. We need space to share stories for encouragement and sustained movement.
Yes, I mean, we would love to do that at some point, wouldn't we? We've had that on our kind of, we have people in the organization with skills that can help us get there, but it's just not, we haven't got there yet. But that is a hope to be able to, we have the online alumni directory right now, which is a very basic way to help alumni connect, but we hope to, over time, find more fruitful ways for connection.
We see folks finding and building contemplative communities in a variety of different ways. One of the inspirations for bringing the circle group and the processing model and contemplative group practice into the model of the school is to give people a chance, if that connects with them or is of service, to then carry that forward beyond the school. And to this day, many groups continue to meet in that format, which is something that we're delighted to see. But what I hear in this question is still just this hunger for deeper forms of contemplative community and opportunities to access that from each other. And yeah, that is a vision that we hold to and a need that we recognize out in the world as something for us to build in this next generation. I mean, when you look at, just to offer the historical analogies, when you look at mystical or spiritual renewals that have happened throughout history, there's oftentimes, you know, you have the first generation of teachers and pioneers. You have, whether it's Jesus or Francis or the Buddha, or in our case, Merton and our beloved faculty. And then you have the second generation who are following in their wake, seeking to apply that wisdom, but also having to build new structures to put it into practice in the world. And I just think that's part of what this next generation has to look like, and that I hope we as a Living School and CAC community are searching for opportunities to do.
I'll just say one last thing.
Yeah.
We were so excited to see the way the platform is working, and to see people joining those groups and the excitement around, because it's the first time we've done that, so a little bit of an experiment to see if our community is willing and excited to engage just with each other in these ways. And so I know Richard was excited to see it. We've been excited to jump on there and take a look at what's being said.
When Richard saw the platform for the conference, his jaw dropped. We've never done anything like this before. It was pretty neat to see what's possible, even though we love being with you all in person and obviously would prefer that. It's neat to see what's possible.
Yeah.
Jan Savory, having listened to Dr. B and Brian, I feel there's a lot I have missed being part of the first cohort. Would it be possible to have some of their teaching made available to alumni?
Yes, yeah, that's something we want to keep doing. I think we've released a few things in the past. When Barbara first did Race in the Cosmos, I think we released that for a period of time to alum. But yes, Barbara's going to be doing an 8-session teaching on Howard Thurman the female influences on Howard Thurman that we're really excited about. So there are some really exciting teachings coming up that we will want to share beyond current students. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question from our own Mike Petro. As so much has happened in our world in the most recent years, and with the changes and expansion of the Living School core faculty, how do you think this will inform the directions the school will grow into in the future? You want to take that one?
You go first.
Great question, Mike.
Yeah, I think we are looking at the current state of the world as we look to the future of the Living School. So I'm just kind of back in that we're living that question, and we'll be bringing that to the team and the faculty as we plan for the next period of the Living School. Yeah, we want to be relevant. That's, yeah.
We want to help these teachings that are relevant find impact in the world.
Yeah.
Teresa Gale, Cynthia has taught us that our consciousness does contribute to the immersion and evolution toward the Omega. Let us as alumni find ways to nurture and support each other, to pray collectively together, and learn and share our work with one another. The alumni community's power is untapped. Thank you, Teresa. Amen. From Julia Nunez, how do we move toward unity when so many do not want to reconcile differences and even taunt us with their oppressive systems? Julia, I'm just going to hold that question.
Yeah.
In the spirit in which it's offered. Thank you. Kevin Bliss, I returned from the Living School tremendously inspired by this new church, but found close to zero interest from my traditional church in either hearing of my experience or comprehending it. It's left me disillusioned about what I can do. This discussion has been great. Thanks, Kevin. I know that's not an uncommon experience, and I hope you're finding support from your siblings here in the Living School community as you figure out how to navigate that challenge. I thought that discussion amongst our faculty about institutions and the role of institutions and the shadow of institutions and how to redeem the interiority of institutions to be so illuminating in the last session.
Yeah.
Kathy Finley, I was in the second batch hatched from the Living School and would love to be able to get some of the videos of teachings from then and other years. Please? You already spoke to that one?
Yes, yeah.
And maybe a couple more here before we wrap. Lords Bernard, contemplation is expressed in various ways across different global cultures, and it is also true that Christianity was not always Eurocentric. The Living School can acknowledge this by incorporating the history of early Christianity, which began in Ethiopia and Syria and other global communities of color. Yes. Yes,
and that is an area we are focused on expanding in the school. So thank you for raising that, and it's one of the Mike Petro, who's on the team, brings that expertise from his background of study. So we're
curriculum development.
Yeah, in curriculum development.
Kathleen Egan, Contemplative Outreach has local chapters. Is something like that possible? Also formation for sharing Living School teaching. Yes, Kathleen, I do think something like that is possible. But again, going back to our competency here at the CAC is broadcasting the wisdom from our teachers. We have started this new program area as an organization called Movement Support that's looking at how do we nurture, incubate, support, inform efforts towards building decentralized communities of practice as one example of what's needed for this next generation of the work. So yes, absolutely, we want to be in support of that, even as we know that's not our expertise and core competency as an organization, as it is for many of you in the school who are community builders and developers. So I think we are out of time.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to say thank you. We have all of the comments and questions that you posted. I know our team will be sitting with those as we continue our discernment process with our faculty and Father Richard for this next phase of the Living School. And we're just so grateful for this chance to be here with all of you today and to regather as a community. in prayer and holding out hope for what this next chapter might look like.
Yeah. Thank you for your great presentation, and thank you for the wonderful questions. And it's always just a dynamic, exciting place to be when we're with living school students and alums. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you all.